In this demonstration, we're going to be looking at Excel's capability to produce graphs from data. Now, before we go any further, it's worth noting that Excel is not the perfect graphing tool. You may wish to use a programming language like Python, as you came across in your programming course earlier from the year, or a dedicated stats program like MATLAB. These can be better. However, if used correctly, Excel can produce good results, but you must be prepared to alter the defaults and customize these graphs. So we're just going to explore how to get the best out of Excel's chart system and graphing system. So the first thing I'm going to show you is how to insert a chart. In order to do this, we can come up to our Insert on the ribbon menu, and we can come along to this little box here where it says Charts. Now, Excel calls all the graphs charts. We have a series of drop-down menus. Each of these drop-down menus allows us to access a different type of chart. So we start here with our bar charts or column charts. We have line charts or area charts. We have pie charts or donut charts. We also have scatter graphs or bubble charts, and a load of others here which you can explore on your own. So how do we insert a chart? Well, that's quite simple. We can just click on one of these drop-down menus, and we can choose one of these pre-formatted graph styles. So for the moment, I'm just going to choose the basic line graph, which is a 2D line graph. Click on that button, and as you can see, as I hover over that, just before I click, this white box is appearing on our worksheet. That's where our graph will be. So I click on the line graph. It's now inserted this graph into our worksheet. Now this graph can be moved around to place where we want. We can increase the size, reduce the size of it, etc. However, as you've obviously noticed, there is no actual graph here. It's just a white box. And this is because we haven't actually selected any data for our graph yet. So I'm just going to delete this by pressing delete. And this time I'm going to select data. So I'm going to come down to this chart example 1 data. And this is the same data you have in your practical. So we have sample numbers down the side here in our A column. We then have some values for iron, magnesium, and calcium. You'll notice that on our sample numbers we start at 1 and we go to 36. However, these are not sequential numbers. So it's going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is sequential, and then we skip 7 and 6 and go straight to 8, etc., etc. So although we have sample numbers 1 to 36, we don't actually have 36 samples. And this will be important in a minute. So to start with, we select our data just by dragging over, selecting the columns we want. I'm including the headings here as well. And we can go to our Insert, come up to our Charts. This time I'm going to select our line chart, but this time I'm going to select this one with markers so we can see where the individual points are. Press the button, and we have our chart inserted. I'm just going to make it bigger so we can see what we're doing. Now before we go any further, I'll just point out our general chart features. By default, we have a chart title at the top here. Currently it's just the default chart title that Excel has put in. We have our y-axis down here, which is an automatic axis that Excel has put in, starting at 0 to 40. And this is based on the maximum numbers within our data. We have along our x-axis, starting at 0 in the corner here, going from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to 26. And this is a serial axis. Unlike our sample numbers, there are no gaps. We then also have 4 individual lines plotted on this chart. We have our sample, which is in blue, coming up here. And you can see these steps. This is because we have those gaps in our sample numbers. And then also on the bottom here, although you can only see 1, which is the purple, which is the calcium, we also have iron and magnesium plotted. They just happen to be underlying this line, and we can't actually see the colours. Now, this isn't really very useful as a chart. There's several problems with it. The first one, and probably the most major problem, is that instead of using our sample numbers along the x-axis at the bottom here, it's using this sequential numbering system. So what we want to do is take our blue line here and remove it from our chart and make sure that our sample numbers from 1 to 36 are along the x-axis. So how do we do that? Well, what we do is you come to our chart and we right click, and this brings up this context menu. And we want to come down to where it says select data, and this allows us to manipulate what data we're selecting from our worksheet and what each bit of data actually does on the chart. So I select that and it brings up this select data source widget. So in this widget we have our chart data range, and this is representing all the data we selected to start with. So this controls what data we can actually add into our various different categories down here. So on the left hand side here we have our legend entries, brackets series. So that is representing these actual lines we are plotting. So each of these is one of our series. So as you can see, we have a sample series, an iron series, a magnesium series, and a calcium series. On the right hand side here we have our horizontal axis labels. So as you can see, by default it's entered an axis series starting at 1 going down to 26. And that's representing these numbers down here on our x-axis. So as mentioned previously, what we actually want is our x-axis to go from 1 to 36 with our gaps in. So we can edit that by pressing the edit button, and this pops up this little axis label widget. And here where it says axis label range, what we want to do is select the data from 1 to 36. Now we could manually type in a range by typing in A2 colon A27, or for ease and convenience we can press this button, come over to our actual worksheet and just select the data. And as you can see, it's entered in our data range. It's also added in which worksheet we're taking the data from, and this is referring to the name of the worksheet down in the bottom on our tabs here. This means you can select data from other worksheets, and Excel will know which worksheet we're talking about. Once you're happy, you can press the button here. It goes back to our axis label with our new range entered in. We can say OK. And now when you come and look at this list here, you'll see that it's outdated those numbers with our actual data from our worksheet. So we're now going from 1 to 36, and we have gaps. So if we look at our gap here, we go from 5, we miss 6, we miss 7, and we go straight to 8. So you can say OK. We can now come back to our chart and have a look, and as we hoped, we have our axis category going from 1 to 36 now with our gaps in. So the next thing we need to solve is what are we actually plotting on here? To start with, we don't really want to be plotting our sample numbers. That's currently masking all the rest of our data because all the rest of our data is below 1 in number. So what we need to do is remove our sample data from our plot. So we can come back to our select data. We can go down to our series and entries. We can click on sample and we can say remove. Now in the background you can see that Excel has now updated our chart. And you can see that our iron, which is red, is now being plotted. Our magnesium is being plotted. And our calcium, which if you look at our data, is magnitude smaller than our two other columns, is also being plotted right at the bottom here. And these are now being plotted correctly. So we can say OK, and we can come back to our chart. Now another way to have removed the sample from our plot would have been to do this. If we go back to our select data, and instead of using sample because we removed it, I'm just going to use the iron as an example. I'll just move this down the side so we can see the chart at the same time. Instead of saying remove, what we could have done is just turned off our individual series. So you can untick that box and then say OK, and it will remove that individual series of data from the chart. But that data is still there within our chart data, as it were. So we can always bring it back. So we can go to select data, retick that and say OK. This is just a way of turning data on and off if you want to have one chart and show different data series at different times. What we're now going to look at is how do we format the chart? We now have the data being presented on our chart in a vaguely sensible way, but we may want to alter the colors, the text on our chart, the actual presentation of the axes, etc. Well, this chart area itself is made up of numerous editable areas. For example, if I click on chart title, you'll see that we get this little box surrounding the text with these little round blue circular corners. This indicates that we have an editable area. Similarly, I could click over here on the y-axis and get another editable area. And there are lots of these editable areas throughout our chart. For the moment, I'm just going to concentrate on the chart title. How do I edit that? Well, there's two ways to get into editable mode. The first one is to right click and come down here and say edit text. We're now in editable mode. As you can see, I can move our little blinking text cursor to where we want and start typing. So I can start typing example. When I'm finished editing, I can just click somewhere else on the chart or on the worksheet, and it saves those details back to the chart. The second way, if it's text, is I can click on here and just double click with my mouse. This brings me directly into editing mode. So I might want to change this and say example chart 1. The other thing you can do with some of these editable areas, especially text, is move them around your chart zone, this white box. So if I go back to my chart example title, I can now drag this to where I want. I could also do this with, say, the key down here. I might want to move the key to the top. So these editable areas, in some instances, can be moved around and dragged. Sometimes you'd like to get more options when it comes to formatting than you get just with the simple editing. Well, most of these little editable areas have an extended edit function. And this is on their context menu, so right click on it, and you come down this thing that says Format Chart Title. Now the key bit here is this little format. Each of these editable areas has its own format widget. If you click on that, it'll open up on the right hand side this Format Chart Title area. Now this little widget comes from the right hand side. You can make it bigger or smaller as you wish. Under here, you'll find the options for the fill and line. So a bit like creating a vector diagram or similar. You have a fill, which is the background of this little area. Currently it's set to automatic, but you might want to set it to solid fill, and then you can change the color manually. By default it's gone to blue, but let's say we want to have it orange. Select orange, and you'll see up on our chart title the background has changed color to orange. We can also add borders to our individual editable areas here. Currently automatic, but we might want to have a solid line and force it to be red. We can change the size of the line, and if we go back to our chart and have a look here, you'll see that we now have a red line around our chart. Now you'll notice as I clicked off the side of the chart in order to see what the edits were, we've now changed our little format widget over here to format shape. This is just the default Excel formatting option when you're not selecting a chart or an element within a chart. If I go back to my example chart, click back on that, you'll see that we've gone back to our format chart title. Other options we might have are effects. Now, a lot of the time we won't be needing this, but you could add maybe a shadow to your text. Choose the type of shadow. This time I'm going to go for this one here. And you can see we've now added a shadow around our text box. The next little option here is size and property, and this gives us all our sizing, alignment, and text properties for where it's placed. And similarly, if you were to click, say, on the key over here, you'll see that we've now got the Format Legend widget open. And each of these individual elements which can be edited, like the axis, will have its own little widget for formatting all the options with that particular widget in mind. These are options you can explore on your own. So for the moment, I'm just going to close down our formatting widget so we can get a bit more room on the screen. And we're going to go back to our chart. Now each of these editable items is an element on the chart that can be added or removed. So If I was to click on our chart, doesn't matter where, you'll see that we have on our right hand side these little three buttons. The first one is this add button, this big plus, and this adds or removes elements on our chart. So if I click on that, we get this little menu pop out, and you can see what we've got currently on our chart. These are ticked. So we've got axes, we've got chart title, we've got grid lines, in this case just horizontal ones. We have our legend, which is now up in our right hand top corner. But we could add some extra things. So we could add some titles to our axes. So if I click this, you'll see we now have axis title and axis title. These are just editable texts, so we can come in here and give our y-axis a title or our x-axis a title. For instance, I could come down here, double click, and call this sample or samples. Again, this is movable, so I might want to put this down here, might want to keep it over here, or just keep it in the center where it was before. So this is how we add and remove individual elements from our chart. So we might want to remove the chart title, for instance. Just click that, it removes it, and Excel will try and automatically resize the rest of our chart to fit the area. There are lots of options here. So we can have data tables added to give precise information about all the data we're using. We can add error bars, we'll come on to that in a little bit. We can add trend lines, we can add up and down bars, etc. Another way to remove elements, and a quick way, is you could just click on them and press the delete key on your keyboard. The final thing in this demonstration is I want to quickly show you how you can move a chart from one worksheet to another worksheet. Now, this isn't as simple as just cutting and pasting the chart, and the reason for this is that the references within the chart itself are intricately linked to the data on this worksheet. So if you cut and paste your chart to another worksheet, there's a high likelihood that all the references in this chart will be broken to this worksheet here. There is a way to get around this, and it's built into Excel. If we go to our chart area and right click, bring up the context menu, and come down, there's this Move Chart option. If we click on this, it'll open up the Move Chart widget. And we've got several options here. We can either, as per default, use the object in, and then we can select any of our pre-existing worksheets. In my case, I've got quite a few here. And this is where the chart will be moved to. Or we can create a new sheet. So if we click on the new sheet, we can then name our new sheet. By default, it's going to be chart 1. I'm going to keep that the same and say OK. Excel then creates this new worksheet. And this is a special kind of worksheet with only a chart in it. And it's down on our tab system here. So this is actually a good way to separate your chart and have it in a separate sheet away from the data you started with. And here's our original data. As you can see, the chart has been removed from this particular worksheet and just moved over here.